Good morning and welcome to the full breakfast, the full Scottish. Today we have with us, we're joined by Rona Mackay, MSP for Strathkelvin and Bearsden, and by Greg McCarra of the Scottish Independence Foundation. So today's chat is fairly full today. We're going to start off with Scottish drug death statistics released by the National Record Office for Scotland, which reached a record high of 1,187 people, and the press seem to be making a field day of this. Rona, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously this was incredibly depressing news. These statistics are awful, and behind every statistic there is a human tragedy, and families that are grieving. So it was bad news, extremely bad news, and I think it highlights the problem that we have in tackling such a serious problem, because we do not have full powers to do that. Before these statistics were announced last week, the Scottish Government have been calling for more powers to deal with situations like this, such as introducing safe consumption rooms, safe injection rooms rather, and we can't do it because we treat it as a public health issue, which I believe it is. I think most people believe it is. Unfortunately, Westminster, who hold the powers over that, are treating it as a justice issue. So we're faced with this ludicrous situation of not being able to try and remedy. We're doing everything we can with the powers that we've got. We've introduced a drugs task force, which will obviously continue to put pressure on the government to work with us. The Public Health Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, has only today invited Sajid Javid to a meeting, to a summit in Glasgow, a cross-party summit, because I don't believe this should be political. This is a public health issue which spans all parties, and it affects people in Scotland. There is an issue with how the statistics are being published, which is another matter, which I don't fully understand, but from what I believe, some of the statistics taken, things like death under anaesthetic or due to other causes, which are being presented as people overdosing, etc. But I think that's a more complicated issue, and I think something that the Drugs Task Force will be looking at. But to take nothing away from these statistics. The other thing is to remember, I mean, my personal view is that something radical needs to be done. Just over 10 years ago, Scotland was called the murder capital of Europe. Yeah. And when the Violence Reduction Unit in Glasgow decided something radical had to be done, and they did it, and now we're in a much better place, and actually the methods that they used were quite radical. They thought out of the box and they worked, and we now have a global focus on how we did that. And I think this is another case where we need to, doing nothing's not an option. The status quo cannot survive, it's not working, and I think we need to do something radical and make the changes that we need to, but we can't be hamstrung by the Westminster government treating it as a justice issue.
Greg, do you think statistics, we can see here a record high of 1,187 people who had died of drug-related causes. But if you recall, we spoke earlier about the safety bill legislation, whereby there were quite a few injuries that went up to a massive high from the previous year statistics for safety bill, but relatively few people had died compared to what they had the year before. Is this just a case of manipulating data for political ends?
Largely that, and what you said, there's so many cases of that as well. Same with safety helmets for cyclists as well. Yes, the injury can be caused because you happen to be wearing it, but the number of lives saved by the head not actually hitting the curb when you fall off, is really quite significant. Rona said it earlier on, playing it for the politics is very unfortunate when people are trying to, unlike the overwhelming majority of the public, you will occasionally get some politicians who will want to play it for party or even personal advantage. And that's sad is the word that I would like to use. I'm not going to go condemning again because that's playing it for the politics. Yeah. Just it would be nice if people could just focus on what is in the public interest. I haven't met a single person who wants to see an increase in drug deaths. Not a single one. Don't think I ever will in my life. So let's just take it for granted that we're all working in the same interest. As far as the stats are concerned, it would appear, and it's only once we've had the lurid headlines condemning the Scottish Government, it's only after that that by an accidental, an off-the-cuff Google by a woman a couple of days ago, she was nameless, but just an ordinary member of the public, found that the stats behind it were actually saying that, for example, if there was an accidental overdose, as you were hinting at, which happens in the household for perfectly normal people in all respects, that counts as a drug death. So the fact that the stats that are gathered contain more information than other countries in Europe do maybe should be commended. The fact that it's been misinterpreted as this is the drug death capital of Europe is unfortunate, and it'd be nice for people just to get a bit of a grip on this and not condemn automatically and actually learn the facts first.
So it seems to be that there is, they're comparing apples with oranges here when they refer to the stats from the NHS in England. But having said that, I don't think the level of detail, I haven't drilled down as deep as the Scottish Government have done here, and therefore it's very difficult to actually compare like for like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's true. And I mean, I think even, without taking the stats as absolute gospel, there's no doubt. I mean, we do have a problem. Other countries do have a problem, but we need to address it. And so, I think we need to look at good practice elsewhere. For instance, in Portugal, where drugs have been decriminalised, and they've had fantastic results. And I, for a long time believed that that's the road to go down. That's my personal view. But as I said earlier, we do need to do something radical. And statistics aside, we need to tackle this because there's far too many people dying, and young people who, I think there's a 67%, again, statistics increase from 2017 in the number of young people dying of drugs. And it's tragic. And it's, as I say, it affects families, and you fear for young people if that's the trend is going to go, the way the trend is going to go. So we need to address it. We need to address it quickly.
And do you think that our social security system currently, with austerity being presented, has got any factor?
I think that's a huge factor. I mean, it's complex to say why this has been going on for decades. I think the increase that we seem to be seeing now will undoubtedly have to do with austerity and poverty and just the circumstances and the kind of hopelessness that people are beginning to feel they're in because they've been squeezed so much. The most vulnerable people and people who should be being helped are not being helped. And I think that's got a huge amount to do with it. And again, it's something that, we would really look to address because it affects so many levels of society.
Greg, the drug trial rooms, the consumption rooms in Glasgow, I believe they've been trialled elsewhere in Europe's North Scandinavia, and that they found that in a safe environment actually cut down on disease and probably premature deaths too. Mm-hmm. Scotland doesn't have the powers, I believe, to do this. No. So do you think we should just go ahead and do it anyway?
There's a very simple solution to solving difficult, almost intractable problems, the type you've mentioned in there, and I've used this most of my life, and it's just go for the least bad solution. Nobody wants to see anybody addicted to drugs. It would be great if what we could do was ease people off and remove their addiction, but that's not going to happen in every case, and certainly not straight away. So how do you deal with it? Do you let people shoot up out in the streets under a bridge somewhere where if they have the wrong type of mix in there, they're dead? Or do we try and help to make sure that happens in a safer environment? So personally, I would be utterly in favour of that. We will be accused, people who argue for that type of thing, as it's some kind of political agenda. No, it's a social agenda. It's trying to look after the interests of people and society as a whole. So yes, the powers are needed. If Westminster acts and puts the legislation in place, which allows that, then okay, it's a start. But you shouldn't have to wait quite as long as we are waiting for quite so many deaths before people listen to the demand. Give us the opportunity to put this in place ourselves.
So decriminalisation, drugs, get rid of that idea, treat it as a social issue that needs to be resolved, and then having the powers to do it. So Rona, what's the worst that can happen if the Scottish Government decided to go ahead and just implement the safe room on their own? What's the worst that Westminster
My
can do?
personal opinion is that we should. I don't think we should wait for permission from Westminster. I think it's too serious for that. I don't know what the worst that could happen is. What they're going to do? Close them down, and that I think that would cause huge societal backlash as well. So, I mean, for me, it just makes utter sense that these places exist, and I think we should just go ahead and do that.
Grand, okay. So moving on now. Scottish income tax figures, Greg, I know you're a fan of that. They were released this week showing an increase of 1.8 in revenue, so the Scottish Government are concerned that only having limited control of Scottish economic levers leaves the economy at risk from a failing and falling UK economy, which could see threatened tax trap materialise in the upcoming fiscal framework review. Where do we go from here? What do we do?
Eyes are glazing over as you speak. Brains are switching off. For many people, it's a really dull, complicated, intractable subject. It's not really. I mean, we do get nonsense over this, of course. There's regular attacks, again, on the Scottish Government for making Scotland the highest taxed part of the UK. Utter nonsense.
Yeah.
Because there are so many other taxes that are lower, and in fact, so council tax, for example, is lower than average in Scotland, and it's a very, very big chunk of people's budget, and plenty of other taxes. But as far as the tax system is concerned and the tax bands, the complaint that an army personnel, living in Scotland was paying more tax than somebody down south. The squaddie in Scotland is paying considerably less than the squaddie in England, but the general is paying more, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. Because
children maybe at university.
Well, indeed, and that's the indirect taxation referring to the £3,000 a year or more. So yes, it's there is a problem in there where you try to have an unbalanced tax system, where you try to have an independent income tax system in a country like Scotland, which is part of another larger state, where it still retains many of the powers of our general taxation. So we're going to have the ups and downs in this. A reasonable framework was worked out a few years ago by John Swinney, so that it would take into account of fluctuations and try and even things out over a period of time. And that's what you're seeing here just now. But the 1.8% increase in revenues is actually something to be applauded, because that's more money into the public coffers in Scotland, money raised by Scotland to be spent in Scotland as we choose, and that's a good thing.
I remember a way back, I can't even remember the year, when there was an extra penny for independence.
Yes, I do remember that.
And that was not well received, but it seems to be a pattern thread here that certainly from the mainstream media obviously have an interest in this, regarding highlighting the failings or the alleged failings in the drug system and now the tax system. Do you think there's a reason why we're suddenly seeing a lot more negative stories about the administration that we currently have? Is this just coincidence, or is this real?
Something to do with independence coming very soon. I mean, it could have something to do with that. I mean, I think with the tax news that came out, again, I think the key is in the words fiscal framework, and I think it's not a level playing field. There's no question of that. It's the way the statistics are gathered. As I understand it, oil and gas is not included, and one thing and another. So the devil's in the detail with all that. I would personally rather believe the Secretary for Finance, who is having to balance our books and does balance our books. We can't borrow, and every year he can manage to balance the books, and I think he's doing a great job. So that kind of thing from outside, quangos, etc., doesn't really concern me. I think we need to focus on the good job that we're doing here.
I notice there's a black hole apparently in the press again, which is the main source of information from the BBC and from certainly the mainstream media, that Scotland's got a $1 billion black hole and we're being bailed out by Westminster.
Oh, we should know that. We're doomed. Did you not know that?
Being slightly facetious in a lot of this stuff, but it is what's been reported, and people take their news from the other prime source of access through either the printed word or from the BBC. But I believe that there just seems to be a bit too protesting too much for some of these things when you drill deep into the information. So This UK Government's Office for Budget Responsibility issuing a stark warning of recession and a 30 billion black hole in the event of our new Tory Prime Minister taking the UK out of the EU without a deal. And I've seen today in the Times an article that said that Boris Johnson was actually fully appraised recently that this is quite a serious situation and that there may well be rioting in the streets. Where apparently it's been reported that he visibly blanched at the prospect. Surprised?
For bringing goods in from abroad, number one priority will be medicines, number two priority will be medical equipment, and if you want to eat, well, that's only the third priority, and if you actually want water to drink that's clean and drinkable, maybe not such an issue in Scotland, we've got Loch Katrine, but south of the border is a very big issue, chemicals to keep the water pure and drinkable, and that's number 5 in the priority list. Yeah, it's pretty scary, and we're teetering on the brink, and nobody is going to be able to say with any certainty what's going to happen in 3 months' time. Is there going to be an extension which allows sense to prevail? Do we just fall off the cliff or whatever? But it's quite terrifying, and we have a person who, of course, is going to take over as Prime Minister this week, who's quite willing to take all the risks for the sake of achieving his personal ambition of being Prime Minister. That's the only reason behind it.
I mean, the ramifications of a no-deal Brexit just beg a relief.
Absolutely.
I can imagine there are people working in the background, like Ireland and a variety of other mainland European countries, because it would impact upon them.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you aware of any of these discussions going ahead? Do you hear from Alan Smith, these guys, that whether there's a kind of last-minute bailout? Because certainly the Westminster believe that Europe will finally capitulate to give them what they want. I think they're actually holding out for that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, I was listening to Andrew Marr this morning, and Simon Coveney, the Irish Deputy Minister, was excellent, and he just put the case for, the fact that the British government don't seem to realise, the enormity of what could happen in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland. I don't think they fully grasp the ramifications of the peace process that's been going on and the damage that this could do to them. The damage to the economy is a given. That's going to happen everywhere, but it's this sort of complacency, I suppose, that they're saying, we'll just leave without a deal, without actually realising. And I don't think people like Boris Johnson have really realised the implications of what he's doing or what he's saying. And it's when, as you say, when things are pointed out that are stark facts, he blanches like, oh, right. But he, being the person he is, will never backtrack. And unfortunately, we've been driven down this sort of frightening path. And I think, honestly, people are actually scratching their heads now and saying, how did we get to this? How did we get to this point where we have a Prime Minister who's likely to be the Prime Minister on Wednesday, coming in with this absolute harum-scarum view of he can just do this, he can do that, and the arrogance of the Westminster government to think. I mean, I heard Ian Duncan Smith saying that the EU were being intransigent, and they will have to renegotiate. We're not in a position to call the tune. It's us that are leaving, and the amount of work and expense that the European Union's been put. Because of a Tory, let's face it was a Tory party decision, it's a Tory party mess, is unbelievable. So I think it's going to be an interesting time, and quite frankly quite a frightening time, I think.
It is indeed. So the stockpiling of foods, the fact that we have legislation that says that if you're now no longer an EU member, you're limited to the amount of passage you can have for vehicles coming in and leaving the country for UK vehicles. So Javid, who writes for iScot magazine, had mentioned in his last tour that people don't protest if there's a shortage of foods in the shelves, they riot. Do you think the Scottish Government are taking that into consideration? I mean, I'm not trying to alarm people overly, but certainly it's a possibility that...
You can be certain that they have, but and just as you're also saying, they will not be shouting out about it, because plans of that sort would be made sensibly behind closed doors, ready to be put into place if necessary. But we have a different situation in Scotland. It will take a bit of time to put it in place, this alternative, but whereas in Scotland we voted 62% Remain, and that has solidified even further since then. We quite overwhelmingly want to be in the EU. If the hard Brexit happens, then we know that we have another way to solve these problems, which is Scotland becoming an independent member of the EU. And a lot of, we're all talking to them regularly, the people who were quite clearly no voters last time round, who as a minimum are thinking about it, and a fair number of them said, okay, this time, fair enough. We will find a way through it. And we have many friends around the world who will try to find solutions for us. An increasing number of friends around the world, it appears. But it's just a tough time that we're going through unnecessarily. And as I say, it is down largely to the egos of a small number of people. Boris Johnson was a committed Remainer until he realised it would be in his personal interest to jump onto the no bandwagon. And people voted no to independence in 2014, many of them in the expectation that, no, stay with the one that you know, it's safe, it's reliable, it's trustworthy, you know what to do, that it's a steady ship, everything's safe within the UK. That ship has just about keeled over. And even if Brexit didn't happen, people know that that ship could hit the rocks any day at all. Time to launch another ship.
Theresa May leaves, her last day is on Wednesday. What do you think her legacy will be for her premiership?
Just being stubborn, being obstinate, and this nonsense of put the country's interests first. That's never happened. I mean, I think once it became clear that she wasn't going to get her deal through after the first, second, third time, it wasn't going to happen, she should have gone back to the people and said to the people, right, here's the situation that we're in, this is what I've managed to negotiate, and I can't get it through Parliament, we want your take on it. And that would, even from the Tory party's point of view, I think would have shown a way forward, and she may well still be in office, but she didn't go down that route because she was obstinate, she was arrogant, and in the end it led to her downfall, and they're now faced with two people who frankly shouldn't be anywhere near being leader of the United Kingdom. So I mean, I think the whole thing has just been an unmitigated disaster, and from the word go, as we all know, Scotland's been entirely ignored and disrespected, as have Wales. But for the past 3 years, our Brexit Minister Mike Russell's been going down to meetings in London, and we get updates on those meetings, and they are just not interested in taking our position into consideration. So there's been no democracy throughout the whole process whatsoever, and I think now we've come to that tipping point where how did we get here? This is utterly ridiculous. But as Greg says, I mean, I think in some ways I feel very lucky, because I think we've got a parachute. We can say we don't want to be part of this. Stop this. We want to get off and make our own way and become an independent country within Europe. And more people are now seeing the sense of that, who previously maybe would have hesitated or thought, a big step to take, too much for me, and now they're saying, well, really, is there any other way? And we know that we're highly regarded within the European Union. They've said they would welcome us. So I think we have to go for it, and I think we will definitely get there.
So Greg, the the American leader was called a racist because of some racist comments they made about some senators.
Yes, indeed.
Our own Theresa May, our leader, glorious leader, was Home Secretary at the time when the vans had gone around with "Go Home."
Yes.
Paralleling what had been said by him. So given the Windrush generation, do you think there's much difference between her and the American president's comments?
I think she's always been a Prime Minister in name only. I don't think she's ever had much of a grip of her cabinet, or even all that much say in the policies. And the one major policy she's tried to get through, she's failed miserably on multiple times. Yes, she could have vetoed it, but I'm not sure she would have had the bottle to have actually just followed through and stopped it. I wouldn't want to go as far as suggesting that she was racist, but there's the old expression, all that it takes for evil to thrive is for good men to do nothing. Slightly sexist, a very old-fashioned term. But
so why would her cabinet just let her do her own thing? I mean, why would they? Because nobody wanted to take the poison chalice?
Yeah, because we're going through a period, especially in some parts of England, where there's a very strong swing to the right and to the populist far-right parties. And MPs were scared of losing their seats in these areas. And it was all about personal need. To try and preserve their own skins and keep themselves in ministerial positions in government as well. And in those circumstances, often people will not do what they should be doing, and I think it's down to that. In the case of Theresa May and the legacy, there's two parts to her legacy. She's served as Prime Minister slightly longer than Gordon Brown. Yeah. Okay, she can have 2 cheers for that.
This is one of her personal ambitions.
It was, yeah.
That was what it comes down to. And as I say, she was a caretaker. It was, as was said of Thatcher a very long time ago, Geoffrey Howe was in office but not in power. Yeah. And that's the way she's been. So she will be rapidly forgotten, and that's her legacy.
Do you think certainly she wouldn't be remembered as the worst Prime Minister ever? I mean, I know that Gordon Brown would probably be quite chuffed.
Worst Prime Ministers would sometimes be the ones who actively choose to do terrible things. Yes. And Anthony Eden taking UK into a disastrous, foolish war in the 1950s would be one of them. But no, I think people look back at her more in sorrow than in anger. What a shame, you know.
I mean, you could say that David Cameron would be the worst Prime Minister. He took us into the referendum. He gambled. He didn't think he would lose, and he did lose, and it's led us down this path. But I mean, Westminster is broken. There's no question of that. We just heard this morning on the Andrew Marr show that Philip Hammond's resigning. You know, just announced it on Wednesday. Yeah, he's resigning after Prime Minister's questions before the new Prime Minister. Presumably Boris goes to the Queen. He's because Boris has asked for a kind of loyalty to him in the no deal Brexit scenario, and yes, so we're going to see the absolute deck of cards collapse on Wednesday, and Boris will put in his place people. Which is an entirely scary thought. So
what kind of interface does the Scottish Government have with the current current government, and do they actually actively have discussions, or does Mandel get involved?
We do our best. We do our best, yes. I mean, within the committee system, we regularly invite UK government ministers, and David Mandel's been in the Justice Committee, and he's, after 4 cancellations, finally came, and it was not enlightening to get his take on Brexit. So yeah, I mean we do our best, and we try to get as much information as possible. We meet, we do this, but to be honest, it's pretty much one-way traffic.
Is a civil service actually actively engaged in
trying
to plan out and mitigate?
Yes, behind the scenes, absolutely, and we've been doing it. We've had to do it, so we are getting on with different planning for different scenarios. We have to face up to the fact that it looks like there will be no deal, so we have to do our own thing in that response, but with very little cooperation from the UK government.
The Minister for Justice is apparently tendering his resignation on Wednesday as well because once Theresa May goes there, it's 1 hour after that Boris Johnson is going to go in and see the Queen as well. What if his name is going through her brain, do you think?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think the Queen has an opinion, or?
No, I think she'll be she'll be more worried about what's coming in than what's going out. I think that's what will be playing in her mind.
What was her comment she made about the referendum? I hope people think wisely or choose wisely, or she's thinking the same thing.
Well, she's got form on that. I remember in 1979 when she said, "I'll never forget that I was crowned the Queen of the United Kingdom." That was before that referendum in 79. So a bit of form on that one. But no, she's seen them come and go, and she'll just the clowns come on stage at the circus for just a few minutes and go off before the main act returns, and Boris will be in that category, I think.
The scary thing, this just seems all normalised. I mean, we're just talking about a scenario which is blatantly, probably nearly World War II status for poverty levels in the country, as opposed to action. Although, having said that, if we're talking about Iran to possibly be the Falklands to divert attention away from problems at home, I mean, are we all in a dream here? Is it a dream state we're in?
It's beginning to look a bit like that, and the Iran situation is something where you think, you know, again, this is crept up. You know, did they take their eye off the ball? Almost certainly they did, because they're too consumed with the domestic problems and trying to get a new leader. Something that is, you know, really dangerous. How much, I don't know how much has been hyped up. I don't know, is one of these things that will blow over. I don't think anybody does. But certainly it's something it's alarming, to say the least. And I don't think they've been in control of it at all.
So some speculation here, I'll put to you, Craig. If we don't get a further Article 50 extension, because the likelihood is, as we have been told before, that the government isn't prepared for a no-deal Brexit. The legislation isn't in place to work out what happens at 1 minute past 12 on the 1st of November. Do you think that the looming potential conflict with Iran and Donald Trump's grandiose offer for trade to the UK is somehow interlinked?
No, I don't think so. No. Given the choice between conspiracy and cock-up, I usually go for the latter. In this case, that's a linkage too far. But as far as Iran's concerned, the one thing that we should never forget about Donald Trump is that he detested Obama. His taking down of, or attempted taking down of Obamacare was largely just to do with the person. And in the case of Iran, the nuclear deal with Iran and the USA, he wanted that taken down, apparently, allegedly, simply as a way of spiting Obama, who put it in place in the first instance. And he didn't really care about the consequences. A guy in the White House who can take down a nuclear deal with a country which was bringing reasonable stability to the region, and in an incredibly volatile region at that. Do that on the one hand, and on the other hand gets all chummy with the dictator of North Korea. I don't see the consistency, the thread of consistency running through that anywhere at all.
John Bolton's intervention was quite insightful. I mean, do you think we are going to be tagging, or do you think America will be going after Iran?
I don't think so. I think they're sabre rattling again, and they're doing it. Trump wants to do it all over the place, but it's also it rallies people for re-election purposes. And now let's focus on what's really important to Donald Trump. For re-election purposes, he wants people to rally to him as the great saviour of the country. And if the country's not under threat, then there's nothing to save. So he's got to kind of pump up the threats. So he's got to create tension so that he can respond to it, so that he can be the saviour. And I think that's what's happening.
But his latest outburst against the senator who go back where you came from, and then particularly speaking to the press and saying that he spoke very quickly after to try and suppress what was going on, when we could see the live video feed that it took him near enough 15 seconds before he stopped, and he didn't even denounce it. We're really getting into murky water with politicians of that calibre inciting. Yes,
absolutely. And I thought that was, you know, like I'm sure everybody did, absolutely chilling to watch that whole rally. You know, with those people shouting and him just looking around and not trying to stop it. He did incite it. There's no question of that. And you know, it's just frightening to think we've got to that stage when that's going on. I mean, the majority of people, I think, are sensible. They don't go along with that. But I think, you know, Greg's point about re-election, and what I fear is that he's appealing to lowest common denominator, and he will have worked out, or maybe not him personally, but his advisors will have worked out that that might be the way that gets him over the edge again. By doing that, by stoking up all that and saying, you know, this is the you know, the guy to make America great again, and it's just another tactic he uses to do it. But it is terrifying and shocking, and it's such blatant racism that it's not even, you know, it's just, he thinks it's acceptable to do that.
So again, going back to Windrush, so there are parallels there. Do you think it's the same organisations behind? Do you think there's a connection between the far right in the UK and the far right in America, or is it just...
they collude.
Yes, I think that's
there's no doubt it's pretty well documented. And they advise each other in campaigns, and they swap advisors back and forth depending on which campaign's on at the time. So in that respect, no doubts at all. And if you look at both Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, it's not just the hair. You know, they have so much in common, which is that they don't really care what they say. They say it for effect, and then they launch it. They throw it like like a missile, they'll launch it into the general populace, let it explode and move on to the next one and don't respond. They don't feel a need to explain, clarify, or certainly not apologise. They
that's
just do
absolutely
it.
true.
And mainstream media's involvement in promulgating this, or do you think they should be held to account, or will there be some time in the future when they will be held to account for helping and aiding and abetting?
The public are holding them to account already. I've
throwing
stopped buying the big titles of Scotland some time ago because I just couldn't support them anymore. Sorry for the plug, but I buy the National because I trust it. But what I like most is a balanced newspaper, as the big titles in Scotland used to be. When I was a young man, that's it. They were kind of generally liberal, internationalist, open-minded, and willing to give a voice to everybody that had anything to say. That was great. They're not that anymore. So they're dying on their feet. The sales figures for the big newspapers, or as I'll call them, the formerly big newspapers, mean that they're having to rely on stories which catch people's eye in the headline, lurid headlines, and that's not news. That's just trash, non-journalism.
But as we've spoken before, there's a generational thing that a lot of people, specifically the folk in the last independence referendum, the 55 plus, is also the demographic that receives their news from the printed media and certainly the mainstream TV. The younger generation, who seem to be the highest with voting for independence, certainly are accessing their information from online. And it seems to be that they're also looking for very short, bite-sized chunks of information. Do you think that's going to be a significant factor in the next India when or if it happens?
Whoever masters social media will have an edge. Doesn't mean it's a slam dunk or anything of the sort, but certainly the Yes side had that and didn't win. But I think there's a better knowledge of it. The registration of young people and getting them out to vote are the two big issues, because the support for independence is that high, their turnout is that low, as opposed to the over whatever threshold you want to choose, but older people with the support for status quo is that, and the turnout is that. So that's where the problem is. It's good to see more balanced journalism. If you don't, I hope you don't mind me mentioning there's your own magazine, iScot, which actually is balanced in this and tries to take a whole load of views into account and is informative. And if journalism kind of returned to that, more people might trust it, more people might actually buy into it. But at the moment, it's just dying.
When you're competing against the situation whereby very young kids, I've got very young grandchildren, and a lot of this stuff is on digital format. They're not touching a book. They're very rarely do they get access to books they sit and enjoy. Is this something
I'm quite optimistic about it in that. I mean, I come from a newspaper background, so that was what I did previously. So, I mean, I'm very passionate about the printed press, etc. But, I mean, I see that my own son doesn't buy a newspaper, but always reads the news on his phone, etc. So, and that's what's happening. But as an MSP, we go into schools. We're asked to go into schools to modern studies classes, etc., to do Q&As and things. And I'm amazed at how mature and well informed the youngsters are. Now, I mean, even in first and second year, within 3 to 4 years, they will be voting. And so many new voters will be voting in the next independence referendum, a whole new, sort of generation of voters. And they are, certainly when I look back to my school days and age at that time, they are very well informed about things. And I always say to them, make your choice based on good information and look at, search for the good information. I think we don't give them enough credit. I don't think that they're as naive as we might think they are, because I think they know when they're being manipulated. And I think they're very good now at searching for information, and they seem keen, I would say, much keener than ever before to think. In my opinion, I get very, very positive feedback about independence. I don't go into schools, obviously you can't go in to be political, but they ask me the direct questions, and they're all very upfront about how they feel about it.
When you find that the freedom of travel will impact upon young kids, certainly just up and sticks and going, I mean, they will not be barred from travelling, but certainly having the freedom that we had, we've enjoyed for the past 40 odd years. Will that sink in, do you think, just in the same way as senior citizens realising that their pensions are the worst in?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to remember that the children or the young people that will be coming up to vote, and the young people that are at school now, they've only ever known won a Scottish Parliament. They've only ever been in the European Union, and that they're aware of the different the exchange programmes, etc., etc. And obviously when that comes up in Q&As, you have to say, well, that could be at risk. Not from our side. We will keep it going as long as we can in terms of Erasmus, etc. But I think, I think they're pragmatic enough to know that is at risk, and I've always found them to be, pro-European and pro-independence by and large. And it's coming, without prompting from them to me. And I'm really optimistic about the generation coming up, and I think they're a lot more informed than we imagine they might be.
So the older generation, which had the largest demographic for voting no, are, according to insurance companies, living longer.
Yes.
So do you think that the young end is going to overwhelm the old end when it comes to the vote?
It's a cohort that moves through. Some drop off that end, more come in that end.
Yeah.
That doesn't change the
Having said
demographics.
that, we do talks, a lot of older generations, so senior citizens say, well, I'm not one of these guys that voted no. We definitely want to see for a bit brighter future, if not for ourselves when it happens, but certainly for our children and our grandchildren.
Yes.
But do you think there's a change in the kind of demographic for the older voter, that they are now beginning to see that life might be better? Should they contemplate the idea of...
I think there were lots, again, just on the edge, but extreme caution just stopped them the last time.
Yeah.
Either abstained or more likely actually voted no, but they've changed. I remember a classic moment. The village that I lived in at the time, I was out canvassing the day after the sermon on the pound, when we were told we wouldn't get to use the pound. And I was about to go up to Chapador, a nice wee cottage in my village, an older man out in the front garden tending his plants, and I thought, I stereotyped, okay? I admit it, he's going to be a no voter, but I'll talk to him anyway. And he said, when I asked him the question, well, I was going to vote no, but nobody's going to tell me what I can do and what I can't use, and that was him utterly switched over to yes, firmly on the basis of that. And I think there's so many things about to happen that those previous feelings of security are now dashed to the extent that people think, well, actually, there are different ways of having that security, and we just have to unshackle ourselves from this highly insecure system we're partly entrenched in. That'll swing a lot of people over.
The United Kingdom state's been very much part of their lives. I remember my father-in-law, who's 93, 94, he was brought up as standing up God Save the Queen at the end of the cinema.
Me too.
Being involved in the Boy Scouts and taking the oath and all this stuff. I mean, this is a very difficult comfort zone for people to stand up and face that maybe, this is not for us.
I think also you have to remember the impact that Project Fear had on the older generation the last time, because they were targeted with wrong information about their pensions, which at their stage of life is what they're concerned about. So many things have happened since then. We're coming out of Europe, and I think that they will now take another look at it and think, well, actually, I can't see the benefit in us staying with a union, because if anything else has happened, this has highlighted how we're not a partnership of equals. And I think people aren't stupid; they can see that there is an element of people who will just vote the way they've always voted because they don't really think about it. But I think that's not as it won't be as evident the next time as it was the last time.
So we have probably the most incompetent Westminster government in living memory.
Yeah.
We have the most incompetent, this is my opinion, opposition in living memory. So the SNP government should theoretically be taking advantage of this at the minute in time, but things seems to be quite quiet from the side of the government. Do you think that, given, assuming that stockpiling is going to happen once we find out fairly quickly whether we're going to be leaving on the 31st of October or not, that there will be those who were previously undecided finally make up their mind, or do you think that Nicola's going to ring a bell soon?
I think Nicola will ring a bell soon, and I think we're seeing, the polls up here are showing great support for us as a government. We've been in government for 12 years. Yeah. We've been in. a government that's been in power for 12 years by this time is usually nosediving, and we're actually, going the other way. So I think we've every reason to be confident that people will take it's a drastic lesson for those who were undecided and all the rest of it to see what's happened now. But I think from our point of view, I think we're playing it just right. We're not, we're just steadily going along, making plans and proving that we've been literally, to coin a real cliche that I don't like, getting on with the day job while all this chaos has been going on in Westminster.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of legislation that we've put through in the last session, is incredible, with fantastic bills, the domestic abuse bill, the recycling, climate change, etc. We've just been, getting on with it, as well as having to plan for the worst case scenario. So I think people are getting it. I think they're getting it, yeah.
So Greg, what happens if Boris Johnson becomes the elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and he turns around and says no to Scotland, back in your box, or he takes the keys away from Parliament?
Well, first of all, let's not presume to do that, because the guy can change his mind
We don't know.
in seconds.
Yeah.
And he will do what he thinks is pragmatically in his interest to do. And that's what it comes down to. But what happens? Very, very good question. First of all, there's a lot of people, a very large number of people in the pro-independence movement who are impatient and want things to happen right now and want to be independent on a week on Tuesday, and I sympathise with. I would like that too, but I don't want to lose it. I don't want to have another decision which goes against us by, let's say, 52 against independence, 58%, 48% for.
Are that low? I mean,
No. I'm just saying I don't know what it's going to be. I want to have that decision made at a time when we're most likely to win it. Now, I think we're probably pretty well at that point now, and certainly I believe, personally, utterly a personal opinion, I believe that a decision will be made by autumn of next year. I may be wrong, but that's, to my mind, it's likely. How is that made? Well, I'm a former trade union negotiator. You never start negotiating at that level. You work your way up through it. I was in academia, and you would start off, if there was a dispute or a disciplinary, either side of it type matter, you start off head of department, then up to dean, then up to assistant principal. You leave headroom for a final stage of appeal of principal.
But that presupposes that you're arguing with somebody who's negotiating in good faith.
Well, this is a major part of what I'm saying, because once you get, if you jump in negotiation to this stage, and there is a point to this, can we just bear with me a tick? If you jump into that stage, the very first response that people will make to your appeal launched at that stage is, did you go through these other stages? And if you say no, they say, throw a six and start again. So what you have to do is exhaust the process. And in the case of independence, we have to exhaust the democratic process. I've always believed that a referendum is the best way to make a decision on a single subject, because an election, a general election, is a multifaceted, multi-parameters issue where you're not sure what people are deciding on, what is their decision point for what it is they're voting for. But nonetheless, to now directly answer your question, if Boris Johnson, we haven't officially and formally asked for permission, if I call it that. I hate the term, but don't normally use it, for Westminster recognition of an independence like we had the last time. But that will be done. When it's done, if Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, turns around and says no, we'll be able to put that aside and say, all right, that is part of the process which we have now exhausted. Okay, and then after that, we can go to the stage of considering having either a Scottish referendum. Every single way of making a decision has its problems, by the way. Boris Johnson can say no to the first one. Westminster can say, we don't recognise the authority of the Scottish Parliament. They've pretty well said it many times. They can say that if it's a Scottish referendum, it has no basis, in the same way as the Spanish government did with the Catalan. But I have a personal view that ultimately it may get to the stage, and there's been a bit of controversy about this recently, but it may at some stage get to the point where we've exhausted all others as able to achieve what we want to achieve in a way which should be recognised nationally and internationally. Yes, absolutely. And in those circumstances, it might very well be a majority of MPs at a Westminster election. It could very well be that.
Or the Scottish Parliament.
Sorry?
Or the Scottish Parliament.
Yes, but you know what? Westminster recognises Westminster and doesn't give two hoots about any other parliament, sub-parliament, regional council or other body in the whole of the UK.
We seem to be in this situation.
There's only one body that's sovereign to Westminster, and that's Westminster.
I mean, the Claim of Right was signed by Westminster. Surprisingly, it's signed by them. But there's a general consensus of the discussions I've had in the past month or so that we're always asking permission for things rather than being equals and saying, this is what we demand. And therefore, one point was brought up, which I think is a fair comment, was that if Nicola Sturgeon had stood down, she doesn't need anybody's permission to do so. The government, I believe, in Scotland would have 30 days to find a new leader, I believe, under current legislation. Assuming that nobody stands, then it would force a Scottish election. We don't need anybody's permission to force a Scottish election because that's part of the process of the procedure in Scotland. And then we stand in the mandate, or the Scottish Government stand in the mandate, that if they win a majority of MSPs, this is a declaration of independence. And therefore there is no requesting permission from Westminster, because we know fine well that the...
And here's the downsides, plural, to what you're saying. First of all, there's so many ifs in that, contingencies. If this happened, and then if that, and if we're lucky enough for that to happen, then maybe that'll happen. Well, then we get to the point where it begins to be feasible.
But the first criteria, we have no control. We have control ourselves. Yep. So Nicola standing down, she doesn't need permission. Nobody standing for First Minister.
That's the one major false assumption. Because the unionist parties in the Scottish Parliament have a majority and could choose somebody who's not too obnoxious and that they can all get on with in some way, cobble together some programme of government and have effectively a caretaker First Minister to see them out to the end of this term. That could easily happen.
But we have a combination of Greens and SNP, would that not?
Well, if we did go down the road that you're talking about, there's only one single election in the Scottish Parliament where there was a majority of SNP MSPs. Now, fortunately, the last one there was a majority of pro-independence ones. But it's much more difficult to gain a majority by that technique than it is either by a referendum, where we're quite close to it, or Westminster. All opinion polls just now are showing us getting about 50 out of 59 MPs, and it's MPs that are recognised as having constitutional authority in Westminster. Nobody else does.
So there is a poll apparently being conducted by the UK government, which has been embargoed, or whatever the word would be. What do you think that's saying? What do you think it's showing them? The fact that they're not actually making it public, would that not give you an indication that maybe there's something they don't
want to get out? I think it's usually that. But it's interesting too, just and linked to what Greg was saying, with the Scottish Conservatives in the Parliament are now completely estranged from their MPs in Westminster, who are all to a man and woman backing Boris, I believe, and up here, is something different. So Ruth Davidson, any sort of credibility or kudos that she had is now gone. I mean, there's no question of that. So this has even split, their party in that sense between Scottish and English. But what Greg's saying, I think, is absolutely right, and I think it's going to be interesting that the different routes that you can go down, and I think if we do as well as it's been projected at a general election, and I personally think there will be one quite shortly after Boris becomes Prime Minister, that takes us into a whole new game, because if we have 50 MPs, what does that say? That says people of Scotland have spoken. So I genuinely think there's the scenario you put forward, there's too many hypotheticals, but there are routes that we can get to, and it's just a question of process.
Just another couple of words on that, and the people who complain it's about time that Nicola called it. And just about time she told us what she's going to do and when she's going to do it. I don't remember reading in any history books that Dwight Eisenhower and Winston Churchill actually sent a detailed piece of correspondence to the Third Reich to tell them about the D-Day landings. I thought they did that secretly. And similarly, if you just do not reveal your plans, it's foolish. And if you don't trust your leaders, okay, elect new leaders. But if they're doing a decent job, trust them, because they are actually working on the same side as you.
But part of the management of the country or any business is keeping your troops on side. And we see a lot of people voicing concern. Certainly, they're not anti-Nicola Sturgeon in any shape or form, but they're just saying, well, what is happening here? What's going on? And we had said that
That's the frustration.
there is no starting gun because
Yeah.
the union Westminster have been going since 1707 or prior to that. I mean, it's still, they've been working all the time and working damn hard and very effective at it because we're still not independent.
Yeah.
Well, here's a wee hint, because Nicola announced a good while ago that the intention would be to have a referendum in the second part of next year, and the legislation will be put in place at the turn of the year. Now the process of putting the legislation in place, it could be accelerated if need be,
Yes.
and that's an important consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So should we start telling the whisky companies to start bottling independence whisky now?
That
I've
would
got
be
a
lovely.
bottle in my
That'd be
house.
nice,
It is open
yeah.
to Independence Day.
Which moves us swiftly on. We've got into the last 5 minutes, believe it or not. So 50 years ago this weekend, NASA's Apollo 11 mission, I remember it very well because I was in Torquay at the time watching it on the black and white TV. It made history with the first moon landing, if it happened or not. Okay.
Oh no,
But
don't go there. No!
We all saw it.
Yeah, well, okay, we're just going to be objective here. But anyway, what would bring back that spirit of hope, which was still so alive in the 60s? Well, yeah, swinging 60s. I remember the 60s.
Yeah. Oh,
You're too
in
young.
which
You
case you
really
weren't there, as the saying goes.
Back into the 50s, yeah, no, I remember it well. And I don't remember it particularly swinging either, but travelling a number 6 bus into Glasgow in the rain. Do you think it's time we travelled somewhere else, or some big event happening for humans rather than constant?
I've got a different take from yourself in this one. The moon landing was one of the most profoundly important events in my life.
Yeah.
I was 15 years old. My mother wanted us all to go to bed. Are they done yet? No, they're not. They haven't got down at the moon yet. 2 years after it, I signed up to go and study for a degree in astrophysics, and it was driven by that.
Yeah.
I dropped the astro part of it later on because, by God, it was a tough degree to do, I'll tell you. And I had other things going on in my life that were much more fun. But I think if you don't look up to the skies and you spend all your time staring at your feet, you have to expand your horizons, not just intellectually, but physically as well. If mankind's going to survive centuries, never mind millennia, then it really has to broaden its scope. We have to not just go to the moon. That's just a kind of a stop-off. It's like a skipping stone. Moving on to Mars is utterly essential, and thereafter it gets simpler, it gets cheaper, and there's benefits from it. Already, getting plenty of benefits from the original stages of space exploration. Your mobile phone wouldn't do what it does without the initial stages of space exploration. So got to do it.
So, Rona, I know that you probably don't remember the 60s, but...
Oh, that's kind, that's kind.
Scotland is one of the largest manufacturers, OEMs, of small satellite systems. Is that your constituency, that company that manufactures them?
No, I don't believe it is.
By where you
are they?
Yeah.
Right, no, sorry.
A very small cube, the largest in Europe, in fact, for building satellite systems. We are quite a clever nation. I mean, we always have been, but we tend to keep our light under a bushel most times.
That's the problem. We don't blow our own trumpet.
Do you think Scotland will get involved in the space travel at any time?
I think so. There's spaceports
potential
up
bases.
in the north.
Caithness.
Caithness, that's right. So we seem to be. I mean, I'm not quite as enthusiastic as Greg about it. I mean, it was an amazing event. It was just obviously it was historic. It was fantastic breakthrough. But part of me going along the years is thinking, should we be more dealing with the problems we have here on Earth and spending the money on that, etc., etc. And I suppose now I'm beginning to think, I'm moving towards we do need to explore, but I'm still a bit on the fence about it. Yeah.
I mean, the 60s was the year when technology seemed to take off.
Yeah.
White heat of technology as well.
A lot of it, and the fact that most people generally don't realise that the power of the computers that actually got the moon landing was less than that of the processing power of a calculator. Much less. Which would give me the fear of hell. Frankly, had I known then what I know now. But it's amazing how we can do it. And then we wonder how we can build the pyramids. You suddenly realise, well, because they use brain power to make it happen.
Yeah.
So we're kind of winding up at this minute in time. Greg, I know that your organisation has currently got a fundraising effort out in Glasgow at the minute in time. If you've got 30 seconds, you just tell us what it's all about. How
You'll see the stall in various locations around Scotland,
Oh.
and we're looking at possibly expanding it. But we have stalls out in the streets. It has money a mickle, max a muckle written on it. Small donations from a large number of people help to raise the funds, which can go out to grassroots organisations, which will do the most important part of the work, which will shove us over that 50% margin and win the next referendum for independence. And the Scottish Independence Foundation is purely about getting money in, to put money out, to try and help people organise at grassroots. Don't wait for a starting gun. Get ready now. When the gun's fired, you want to be ready to win, not to start.
So you can just go, turn up and just make a pledge and
That's it. That's it. Chat to the folk in the stall. It's no hard sell. People come to the stall. There's nobody chasing you up or anything. It's very friendly, and it's going quite well. Going very well.
And Rona, do you have anything that you'd like to say to the millions of people that are out there listening to?
Just despite everything that's happening just now, coming from Westminster, I think as far as our nation's concerned, be optimistic. I think we will find a way through this and get our independence.
And he's coming.
Definitely.
Great. So I'm just waiting on a shout in my ear though, but I'll give you a small advert for Broadcasting Scotland. In actual fact, producing TV output is very, very expensive, and to allow this event to happen, to make more programmes and just generally pay the bills to cover the costs of getting the message out to folk who just can't travel to events, who have a specific interest in hearing something slightly different from comes from mainstream media. Broadcasting Scotland is here and have been ably supported by Greg's organisation, so thank you for that. £5 a month just to Broadcasting Scotland would make a huge, huge difference to these guys to help with the heavily costed equipment that we have here and to generally just make this thing run. They are grassroots, they're desperate to give you a good event, and I'm sure you'll find when you see the output they've done so far, it's well worth supporting. So you can sign up to our website, www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register. You've got the ability to make it happen. Please do so. And with that, I'd like to thank both Greg and Rona for attending today.
Pleasure.
And hopefully we'll see you again some other time soon.
Thank you.
Richard. Bye just now.